So, how is 2024 going for you all so far? Without getting in too much personal detail, I can tell you that we went through a lot here at the CritFacts team, as evidenced by the rather long breaks we had between the last few videos. She's in the hospital and she passed unexpectedly? My mom? Well, when's she getting back?
You have cowered in your crumbling denial long enough.
No, we're talking about a different kind of denial today. That being said, there was definitely one thing that wasn't on our list of things to happen this year, and that has to be J.K. Rowling outing herself as a Holocaust denier.
How? How did you type this and press send without thinking, I should maybe check my source for this, because it might have been a fever dream?
The following drilled tweet is fake, alas, but too funny not to include. Almost as funny as the time we actually predicted TERFs. One thing to clear up right away. When we say Holocaust denial, we are talking about willful misrepresentation of the history of the Holocaust. Especially to push a political narrative such as making Nazis look more sympathetic or less blameworthy. This is universally regarded as bad and wrong by everyone who isn't a Nazi or Nazi apologist. For the rest of this video, we'll just be shortening Nazi apologist to Nazi, because we don't make distinctions without difference here. The most common ways people engage in Holocaust denial is usually to try to cast doubt that it happened at all. But deniers often start little things like, there can't have been that many. Or they lie about the policies the Nazis used to carry it out. Importantly, Holocaust denial includes denying the presence of targeted subsets. Jewish people were the most prominently targeted and that needs recognition. But it's a well-documented historical fact that Nazi Germany absolutely targeted gay and gender non-conforming people too. As a heads up, for the sake of pacing, we won't be able to voice every single tweet that we've sourced for this video. So you might want to pause the video periodically to read them in depth if you want to. On that note, here's a huge content warning for the remainder of this video for obvious reasons. I admit that I usually hate going super hard before the intro, but it needs to be said just bluntly, and then we can dig into the details. If you're watching this, you probably already know who J.K. Rowling is, and that she once wrote the most beloved children's fantasy books of the late 90s and early 00s. Well, until she accidentally outed herself as a vicious transphobe, starting with liking a bunch of tweets by Magdalene Burns. The late Burns was a disgusting anti-trans eliminationist who at one point compared trans people to blackface actors and who invoked the anti-Semitic trope of baselessly accusing George Soros, a wealthy Jewish man, of secretly funding trans activism from behind the curtains as part of a nefarious plot to erase women and or depopulate white people. I would like to point out that Jewish women exist. Imagine calling trans people the same thing as blackface actors, but also believing that transphobia isn't real and that TERF is a slur. Today this is mostly old hat though. It is fairly common knowledge that J.K. Rowling hates trans people, and whether or not her work should be supported because of that is unfortunately still up for debate in some spaces. Here at CritFacts, we do not believe it is a sin to enjoy art, but it's your responsibility to pay attention to the messages in that art and to make an effort to not give money to an abuser. She did up the ante incrementally over the years by passively endorsing the likes of Matt Walsh and writing in support of another vile anti-trans eliminationist, Kelly J. Keane, aka Posey Parker, even going as far as to offer to bankroll Kelly J's legal struggles should she encounter any. I'm not transphobic, I've just got loads of money set aside to help those who make their careers all about attacking trans people. Every once in a while someone on Twitter tries to educate Joanne on trans history, including how the Nazis persecuted queer people as a whole. Though these efforts are largely fruitless, this is nothing new. However, March 13th in the year of our Gregory 2024 was the day when Joanne decided to double down on her bigotry by starting not one, but 3 threads in which she denies that Nazi Germany persecuted trans people. I would like to say that I Nazi'd this coming, but the truth is that I thought it would take her at least another year to take the plunge this deep into full mask-off right-wing extremism. I know it's a fairly common meme to say that money rots your moral soul, but even that statement doesn't fully encapsulate how awful of a take this is. I can only assume that this is yet another vain attempt at staying relevant from her. She's run out of ways to generate positive attention, so maybe now she's trying to stay relevant by being awful. I find it hard to believe she's actually in the right, like at all at this point. It's like she's looking through the mirror of Erised into the fantasy world where she's not the villain. The truth is though, this isn't the first time the presence of trans people during the time of the Holocaust is being denied. Back in 2022, a Twitter discussion grew into a civil lawsuit that concluded with historians acknowledging that the fact that trans people were indeed victimized by the Nazi regime. This conclusion was later reiterated in an official statement by the German parliament. These screenshots are provided by Twitter user Alejandra Carabello, whose calm reply with credible citations was responded to with gaslighting and lying from Rowling and her sycophants. When questioned on her views, she claims to know all about Hirschfeld, the man who used to operate what is now considered to be the first transgender clinic in Germany, and then goes on to engage in whataboutery in an attempt to, as the serfs rightfully point out, move the goalpost again. This same whataboutery is reflected in a thread she eagerly links to her followers. Unfun fact: Malcolm Clark is a former director of the anti-trans Tufton Street charity LGB Alliance. Furthermore, at one point he wrote about how he thinks LGBT+ clubs in schools run the risk of attracting so-called predatory gay teachers. Even famous actor George Takei jumped in and tried to give JKR a crash course on Nazi Germany and its persecution of queer people as a whole. But, as usual, this was mostly in vain. George probably hoped that Joanne might give his words some thought, because he is a cis gay man. She had already blithely dismissed other people linking her to sources where she could educate herself. How about we read authoritative sources like the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust and Smithsonian Magazine instead of random Twitter threads? Unfortunately, only rational beliefs tend to change when presented with the conflicting evidence. The excellent account Bad Writing Takes did a similarly excellent thread on the psychological mechanisms that made it so Rowling keeps doubling down despite being clearly, obviously and utterly wrong. To understand why this is particularly important, you have to have a basic understanding of fascism. Fascism relies on shoring up support behind an in-group and vilifying an out-group, with the pretense of reasonable cause, up until it's too late to stop them. That's when the long knives come out. The main focus of the German fascists was Jewish people, but gay people absolutely were also targeted. The infamous pink triangle was specifically for gay men, and in order to do this, they relied on conflating heterosexuality with family values, health and, importantly, reproduction. I still vividly remember from my reading in high school a World War II memoir detailing an escape plan. And one of the key details is that they would lie and say they would have lots of kids for the Führer. Homophobia and transphobia are often key components for fascist ideologies. It's no secret that 2 sperms can't make a baby, nor 2 eggs. But what fascism does is promote the idea that all of the pawns should just be making more pawns. And giving people the social and political freedom to have and celebrate relationships that are not dedicated to serving the empire? That's hedonism! Blasphemy! And just like that, any identity that isn't geared towards reproductive capability is pathologized and vilified. If you're a fascist leader, then doing this will probably boost the birth rate of your people, help you expand your empire and grow the number of people under your control. And all it took was turning your people against each other and manipulating them into falsely equating baby making with a higher purpose. In this case, the so-called Aryan race. To understand why Jews is its own video essay, and I would like to give a glowing recommendation to watch Anti-Semitism, an analysis by PhilosophyTube. Ironically, even though her entire book series is dedicated to fascism and claiming herself to be a feminist, Rowling utterly fails at understanding how sexism and the sexual contract was a major pillar of Nazi ideology and practice. Like, did she miss the part where Mein Kampf includes just loads of baseless, sexist assertions such as all women crave to be dominated by a strong man, but no men do? Like, this is just basic pattern recognition. It's important to understand how and why history happened, starting with being honest about what actually happened. Part of the reason we study history is to learn the patterns so they don't repeat. Hatred of others, specifically selecting for sexualities or life paths that are less, quote, useful and lives deemed not worth living, that's a pattern that just keeps coming up in fascism. But she doesn't just want to keep herself shielded from pattern recognition. She also doesn't want anyone else to apply it to her behavior and her choices of who she supports. Speaking of awful dictators who are quoted at turf rallies, this is a tweet by an awful person that she retweeted. This is a willful misrepresentation of the historical facts trans and queer people were pointing out in response to this. This person is trying to portray trans folk as we're all claiming that trans people were more acutely targeted than actually happened for stolen valor. No, we're pointing to the historical evidence that clearly indicates trans people were among the victims. But who needs accurate reporting when you have fans who will misappropriate the violence in Gaza as a whataboutism for anti-Semitic Holocaust fucking revisionism? This is Holocaust
Revisionism?
definitionally. And since we're on the topic of Palestine, I'm just gonna leave this here. Like, even if the Nazis were neutral on whether or not to murder trans people, it's statistically implausible that none of the millions of people murdered by the Nazis were trans. Jewish trans people do and have existed. Disabled trans people, gay trans people, Romani trans people. Many people in multiple of those categories. And what we're bringing to the table is hard evidence that trans people were, in fact, more likely to be murdered than non-trans people during the German Holocaust. And whenever people put forward this clearly, objectively true and defensible point, trans people are treated like we're trying to erase other victims of the Holocaust. At this point, it's an objective, indisputable reality that J.K. Rowling is hostile to trans people. Therefore, it's accurate and correct to call her transphobic. Because that's what that word fucking means. She is acting in a transphobic way, in ways that would harm us and disregards our voices. The way she talks about trans people consistently indicates that she sees trans people as delusional or deceptive, and a threat to women generally. Here's just a small sample of some of her relevant conduct on the subject. 1. J.K. Rowling has gone all in with her new TERF persona. She actively misgenders trans people who are just minding their own business, see India Willoughby. She uses typical anti-trans lingo such as trans-identified and gender ideology, and thinks gay and autistic children are being sterilized by the trans cult. Her arguments and word choice are consistently aligned with the TERF talking points of the day. 2. J.K. Rowling endorses far-right pundit Matt Walsh for his documentary What is a Woman?, which has explicitly anti-feminist, homophobic messages, and it even squeezes in some racism too. I would like to recommend Jessie Gender's extensive video essay on how Matt Walsh is trying to launder fascist ideology in broad daylight. And Rowling, you're supposed to be media literate enough to detect such obvious anti-feminist propaganda. The dude is trying to argue that if you don't pump out babies, you're doing irreversible damage to your chance at fulfilling life, making white children. TLDR, Rowling is either willfully ignorant of why her message appeals to fascism, or she has accepted this reality and is continuing to dig in her impractical heels anyways. I am not sure which one is more sad. Also, I really wanted to include these screenshots, and I don't know where else to put it, so here you go. This screenshot is provided by the graceful and talented Katie Montgomery, who could be doing cool shit like playing guitar right now if she weren't busy fighting transphobia with us. The next one is ours though. Brief aside, the Nazis scrambled to destroy evidence of their crimes once they realized they were losing. The Nazis were meticulous, but only when they thought it was to their benefit. How come these bureaucrats didn't have all those names marked down when they had paperwork for everything? Is a common tactic used by Holocaust denialists when they want to make their target doubt the veracity of the historical figures. If anything, there are almost certainly Nazi crimes that went undiscovered and that we couldn't reconstruct forensically anymore, even if we knew where to look. Number 3. J.K. Rowling repeatedly cherry-picks stories and studies that she can portray as proof of what she wants to believe about us. That we're a fluke, a social contagion. The GC movement regularly asserts that trans healthcare amounts to sacrificing children for ulterior motives, which seems to be playing a very similar tune to the blood libel trope, which isn't a good look. We've talked about that particular trope and why it was pervasive in anti-Jewish propaganda. It was a major tool in promoting the anti-Semitism that fascists rode into power on. This is why paying attention to tropes is important. You would think an experienced author would know this. Anyway, here's another totally unrelated screenshot. And this screenshot got added into the script at the last second because it's just too perfect when juxtaposed with the previous one. Hey editor, can we show them both on screen together? Isn't nature just fascinating? Number 4. J.K. Rowling considers Stonewall, one of the largest LGBTQ+ activist organizations in the world, to be a quote, pernicious influence on public policy, and that they spread medical misinformation, which is a blatant lie. She also calls for both Stonewall and mermaids to be prosecuted. Oh, and let's not forget the most defining feature of any TERF. She's terminally online and spends every waking hour of her day tweeting about all of the above. To anyone who thought that the Hogwarts Legacy boycott was overblown and who thinks that J.K. Rowling, quote, just has some opinions, can y'all acknowledge you were giving money to an abuser unless you at least pirated it? For further reading on the topic of trans people during the time of the Holocaust, Magnus Hirschfield's trans clinic and more, check the links in the doobly-doo, including the videos we mentioned. Now would be an especially great time to listen to Jewish trans people, particularly anti-Zionist ones. There is really not a great way to end this video, so we're going to cut to our credits. Hi! We're Critfax, a team of culture workers trying to make content that fights transphobia. If you would like to support us, consider joining our Patreon like our generous supporters listed here. This episode was voiced by me, Draggy. You can find me on Twitter and YouTube as Rot Studios. And check out my games as well, Keep It Running and Disinfection. Both are on Steam. Dedicated to Prototype's mom. Get back here! I wasn't done setting things right between us!
At last, the world's mind is free to remember a time before the cancerous corruption. The time for denial has passed.